Good day, my name is Keith Feely. This is my email address, and that's my address that I use on Twitter, which I use all the time, by the way. I want to speak to you today. This is the third Keith Talk, and this one focuses upon developing effective learning. It's one of the key skills, which is up here, which if you've seen the previous two, you'll understand the context. But this one is going to focus specifically on getting success in exams. There are others which follow where we can apply it to other areas. However, my story really starts in 1974, which is a picture of me, looking much as I did today, I wish. But I went back to my old school in Romford, because they were begging and pleading with me to go there because they were desperately short of teachers, much as it is now, to be perfectly honest. But I went there as a PE teacher. I'd already done a degree in chemistry at Lancaster University, and then went on, because I couldn't become a professional footballer for Spurs and nobody else really mattered, so consequently I went to Carnegie to do PE, not really aiming to become a teacher, but once I'd done a teaching practice I loved it. But my old school were very keen for me to go back there and help them out of the difficulties we had because of the shortage of teachers. So when I went there, I already was aware that I was a freak. I was very unusual. You can call me other names if you like, because apparently I was born in a disadvantaged background. I was actually born in '52 in the East End of London, where we had absolutely nothing. But in those days I wasn't aware of that. Here's my dad. There's my brother, and when we were growing up we just thought, well, this is what home's like. But I was lucky to go to Romford, to a school which was very different from all the ones around me, and I took O-levels and I took A-levels and I went on to university. We knew nobody that done that, so when I went back to my old school I wanted to focus upon how I'd become so fortunate to be able to do that and to discover what it was that caused me to be successful in exams, but actually in other areas as well. And because I was a scientist, I called it the science of learning, merely because it's the what, why and how of learning, and at the time I knew nothing about it. And therefore what I was able to do was to research and look into what it was that we most needed to learn to achieve good health, well-being and life chances, and follow that up in trying to find a way in which I could most effectively help the young people I was trying to teach to learn those things most effectively. However, because I was in a school which valued exam results a great deal, a secondary school, much as they do today, to be perfectly honest, it's almost an obsession that we've not been able to break, but it meant that I had to find a way, particularly as I've become head of department in science within a few years, to ensure that the children I was teaching actually managed to get good exam results. So I experimented a huge amount on students I was taking in PE and in my classroom to find out what it was that caused us to learn. You can apply this perhaps if you've tried to learn to drive or you tried to learn to ride a bike. You've got no chance of learning anything unless you've got those 5 things in place. For example, if you're trying to learn to drive, like I did with my youngest daughter, I took her onto a field where it was nice and flat, nice and hard, no other cars, and she learned basically bit by bit how to use the car and how to drive the car. She had to concentrate in small amounts, and I didn't make it for too long because it's quite an intense thing, but notice how important that is. If you can't concentrate, I'm afraid you're going to struggle to learn anything. The next part is having an environment. That's why I took her onto a flat field with no distractions there, because I wanted to make sure that she could focus upon what we were trying to do. That's why classrooms so often are such a big problem for so many kids, because they're actually being distracted by all the things that are going on around them. You know, if we can actually be on our own and focus upon that, it often makes a big difference. And when we're trying to learn stuff, you need to do them in small steps. So for my daughter, it meant to begin with, we had to find out how to use the clutch, how to try to accelerate, how to coordinate the two, how to use the brakes, how to engage the engine, etc. Step by step she got better and better, and slowly, with the success she was feeling, she was keeping motivated. Now you can apply that to anything you're trying to learn, and we're trying to help with anybody learn. And always make use of that whenever you're trying to learn something or your children are trying to learn something. Now, because it was exams that were perhaps the priority, it wasn't mine, but it was the school's, one of the things I had to do was to try to help the students, the staff, and because I had obviously people in my department, and the parents understand how they could help those children become successful. And these 6, I called them exam skills at the time, basically they're activities, these things you needed to become good at. Because in an exam, you've got to sit and concentrate for quite a long period of time. Hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, even 3 hours for the A-level chemistry students that I was taking. So consequently, that's a difficult thing for the majority of people, and without the practice, people will struggle to do it. Reading is often considered to be an issue because with exam papers, you've got to sit down and read the things. Now, some of the words are quite tricky, but usually, particularly after a certain level, the reading is not such a big problem as actually understanding what it is they're reading. They read out the words, just don't know what it means. Particularly in maths and science, which I taught a lot of, they would read the words, just didn't know what it meant. So consequently, understanding what those words mean is an important aspect of literacy, and that's really a key part to bear in mind. But funnily enough, the area that people often thought was a big problem, recall, was nowhere near as difficult for many of the students I took. They could remember information fine, just didn't know what to use. So I found different ways, we'll talk about quiz cards later on, of getting people to remember information, but actually this was the big stumbling block. I know the information, even when I gave them information, they wouldn't be able to do it. So I did a lot of experimentation where I gave them the answers, they just didn't know that they were the answers to those particular questions. And when I come on to MC jigsaws, you'll see why matching is such a good word, because that's precisely what you do. In jigsaws, you have the picture you're trying to achieve, you have the pieces, you just got to try to find out which bits goes where. And that's much the same you have in exams. When you've got the information, you've got to work out which bit goes where. Trouble of it is that often people even know the answer, but they don't know how to put it down nice and clearly according to the exam board. And I worked for 3 different exam boards between 74 and 87 in order to try to make sure I could understand what it was that we were trying to do. And in fact, used to get loads of these books which had the answers in it and the breakdown of it. Talking about that, that's my exam paper from when I was 16. Not very long ago. That's my O-level. That's how much of a geek I am. Anyway, carrying on with that, the writing of the answers and having specifically knowing what the answers are is crucial. And very often, without having the mark schemes, you won't have a clue why it was that they weren't accepting those marks. So there you have the 6 exam skills, as I referred to them at the time, which underpin how you're going to be successful in exams, in virtually any exam. My A-level students were absolutely brilliant in the late 70s and early 80s, well they are anyway, but they were then in helping me and us to understand what it was that they needed to be successful in exams. And we worked out 5 key areas that were able to identify why they lost marks in the exam. Obviously, when you've got a long exam, and theirs were 2.5 hours, you know, losing concentration for the last hour or so was actually vital because they kept becoming careless. And for some of the children younger than that, that was often a major issue, that even after half an hour you could tell that they were struggling to sit still and really keep focused. The misunderstanding of the question is what I was referring to before, in as much as, oh, I thought it meant that, oh, I didn't realise that's what it meant, because some of the language which is used in exams is not what we use in everyday speak, and therefore unless you're used to that language you won't be able to understand the question and certainly go on to the next bit, know that that's what the answers are about. Recalling the information, as I said before, wasn't as big an issue. We found a good simple way of learning the key pieces of information, and that isn't as big an issue as I thought it was going to be, and I'll show you how to do that later on. But this one is the key area. I I didn't realise that's what when you are trying to go through exam papers and you give them the answers, they just didn't realise that was what they were after in the exam. And it was very, very frustrating, because you knew that these students were very good at science, at maths, at English, at geography, at history, or whatever it was I was trying to help out, but they just didn't realise that's what they were being asked for in the exam. And that's why when they came to write the answers, often they put the answers down that they thought were going to give them the marks, but sometimes they were incorrect words. In maths, we used to use different words as we did in science, but they actually meant the same thing. But because the language is not actually necessarily exactly the same, sometimes they weren't going to get the marks. So there you have something which is extremely useful if you're trying to help people become successful in exams. And I used to use this poster a great deal to emphasise, particularly to the parents, because if you want your children to be good at exams, I'm afraid they're going to have to practice like that, because that's how they're going to be assessed. It's like I used to say in any of the sports I was taking, unless they can actually play and put those skills into action in a match situation, they're not going to be successful. They may be very good, or whatever the sport might be, but actually not being able to do it in those circumstances is a crucial part of it. And that's why when I used to talk to parents and the staff and the students about why they're struggling, they used to go through those 5 learning requirements, and we can see that if you go through each of those, you've got a good example how to use the 5 learning requirements to actually become good, or perhaps not so good, in exams. And we'll deal with that when I go on to super learning later on. Remember that these are skills, so you're not going to learn be good at exams overnight. It takes practice, and it's going to take deliberate practice. I'll explain what that means later on. But it meant that for me, as a sporting background, obviously you don't expect people to become really good at any particular skill overnight. It takes time, and assessing those skills will take time, and you'll see I'll use that a lot later on in other Keef talks to explain where the problems are, because exams are actually a problem in themselves, and the next Keef talk is called The Trouble with Exams, because this is a major issue. For example, Tiger Woods and Rory, great at golf, but you wouldn't expect them to be assessed on just one hole or even 18 holes. You're going to assess them over lots of tournaments over a long period of time, and consequently when we have to come to terms with exams, they're being judged in that very small window of opportunity, and often they don't do very well because they're just not very good at exams, or they're actually unfortunate on the day, which is a big fact. That's why, to finish off, it's important for me to emphasise, when I was explaining this to staff and explaining this to parents and explaining it to the kids in the late 70s, I had to say to them, this is going to take time. This is not going to happen overnight. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You may have heard it used a lot in the last 40 years since I began using it, because it's so useful. You've got to think this is long term. Okay, the exam may be a year away, but that's not as important as what they're going to be like in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time. And so perhaps that's a good place to finish. The next one I do will be focusing upon exams, the trouble with exams, and how to overcome the difficulties that people have in exams. I hope you found that useful, and I hope you tune in to the next Keef Talk. Thank you very much.